You're a local boy growing up right outside of Boston. You started out at the Norwood Arena in the hobby division in a car, appropriately, I believe it was the V8, and then you progressed into the sportsman and you won the 67 championship. You moved down south, you ran the Grand Americans for a while, then Grand National, now Winston Cup. And in 1970 you had a day which I think every short tracker aspires to do, and when you won the Daytona 500. How did it feel, especially for a local kid from New England?
What it did is, that came along surprisingly fast for me. And even though we run a lot of races, we run several years of racing before that happened, driving for Richard Petty that day, the guy sitting behind the steering wheel was still the same guy that ran his first hobby car race at Norwood Arena. And so it was, it was a thrilling thing. When I got the checkered flag, Bruce, it was like I wasn't sure I got it or not, and I run the next lap wide open. I never lifted till I run an extra lap just to make sure that something like that happened. It was really, it was a heck of a thrill for me, and it was fun. I had a lot of my buddies. Eddie was there, Jack Malone, Bob Bakioki, a lot of the guys that from the local area were there to celebrate with me that day, and it was a fun thing.
Peter, a lot of people, there's always been these rumors why you gave up the Winston Cup. Could you just tell us in a few words what happened?
I drove in '68. I was lucky enough to win Rookie of the Year. In '69, we didn't run in that. In '70, drove for Petty, and then in 1971, I ran about a half a schedule for Cotton Owens in Spartanburg. And the problem was, in 1969, Bruce, I went out the window of a car at Bridgehampton, Long Island, and the car rolled over and landed and buried me in the sand, and these vertebrae were pretty well screwed up. Well, being a fairly young man at the time, it didn't bother me that much. And each year, each race, it got worse and worse and worse. And to tell you the truth, I didn't really give up racing because I wanted to. I gave up racing because I had to, because my neck was really bothering me. And so at that time, I was married, and my wife and I moved to Atlanta and set up a business, and we still have that business today.
Peter, it's funny. One day I'll always remember about you is, I think it was right after you won the championship in '67. We were all at Jack Malone's Donut Shop in Needham, which was the home of a lot of race cars. Mills and Welch '79, Bobby Melnick, Bobby Bakioki was nearby, and we were all in the donut shop one Sunday, and Peter was there with all his worldly possessions, which was like a television and a suitcase and a brand new Ford pickup, and we're all having coffee, and Jack Malone said to Peter, or he said it in a little gruff words, Hamilton, you look at all these clowns in here, because you're on the way up, and when you're on the way down, they'll still be here. And Peter just looked and laughed, and I can say that Peter, he did win the holy grail of stock car racing, the Daytona 500. He had a brief but spectacular career, and I think when Peter shows up at these meets and at the Near Hall of Fame, it shows that here's a guy who made it to the top, but has never forgotten his local roots. And for those of us who are lucky to remember watching Peter at Norwood and Thompson, it was something. What was it like to race? You raced in probably one of the golden eras of the modifieds with Bergen and Hop Harrington and Leo, and Fred DeSauer was on the way up, and Donnie McCabbage was on the way up, and you beat those guys. And you raced, they beat you somewhat, and you beat them. What was it like racing with those guys today?
It was pretty good. Those times don't just go away. I think about them, and I've talked to my wife and different friends about those times. Jack Malone and Bob Bakioki and I live on the same street down in the Florida Keys, so we get to talk about racing, talk about the old times a fair amount, and I will tell you that it was a wonderful time to be involved with racing. There was a lot of camaraderie. Bugs and I were just talking about, how that 4 or 5 of us would leave, and on a Thursday night racing Catamount up there for Kenny Squires, and Friday night at Malta, or Saturday night at Plattsburgh or Norwood, Sunday at Utica or Thompson. And the thing is that as long as it was one of our crowd that won a race, which fortunately a lot of the time it was almost a feeling that we had won ourselves, and there was a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of working on each other's cars, and sharing of tires, sharing of knowledge. I wouldn't take anything for those times, Bruce.
They were a lot of fun. And what are you doing today, Peter?
Well, I don't know what I'm doing today. I still have my business in Atlanta, and I have a gentleman that looks after it for me, and 6 months out of the year, my wife and I live in the Florida Keys. And then the rest of the time we divide between Atlanta and making sure the business is still there, and coming up here to Maine. We're about 4 hours from here at Waterford. We're up in Sanford, and we've been going to that cottage for many, many years. And I guess you'd say that I'm pretty much retired. My daughter, we have one daughter, and she's married, been married a couple of years, and she has a grandbaby on the way, and so I'm fixing to be a grandpa, and I like that.
That's kind of neat. Peter, today the Modified Tour runs 18-20 shows, same for the Bush North. The Winston Cup guys complain about 30, 35 shows, 36 shows. How many shows, when you chased the championship, plus rainouts, did you go to?
I was just telling that to another guy. We towed to 121 different shows in 1967, and we ran 107 races. So the percentage-wise, we didn't get rained out a whole lot in that, but that was a lot of racing. Dickie Travish worked with me, and he worked on the car and drove the truck. And when that season was over and we won the championship, he reached out and stuck his hand in mine. He said, you know, thanks a lot. He said, but I don't think I'm going to many more races. And I don't think that he has.
I don't think Dick ever went to. I don't even know if he's around anymore.
I think he lives in Needham. Is working for
him. I'm running into Dick, and he said the same thing.
Yeah, good guy. He worked real hard with me, and I appreciate that.
Eddie Flemke was your mentor. Eddie probably had as much influence on so many people, whether it was you could Denny Zimmerman, the late Richie Evans. Mm-hmm. Eddie's name, even though Eddie's been gone almost 20 years, his name still crops up all the time. What influence did Eddie have on you?
Well, when I left Norwood Arena and started to branch out and going to Thompson or going to Stafford, and eventually we went up to Malta, New York, I began to see this guy that was willing to help anybody, didn't have a lot of money. His car didn't look like a money car, but it flew. It went very fast. And I had nothing but respect for the guy, and so as a new guy trying to learn, I just tried to hang around with Eddie, and Eddie kind of at some point befriended me. I don't even recall asking him, but he just kind of befriended me, and it got to a point where places, for instance, at Malta, he would let me warm up his car, he'd warm up my car. He'd tell me what he thought of mine, and what I told him I thought of his didn't really count. But we'd do stuff like that. We'd run heat races where we'd kind of swap positions back and forth. And when Eddie hurt himself, he broke his leg up there, I moved down to Connecticut to help him put his car back together and stay with him. And it helped Eddie get the car back together, but that particular period of time, that month and a half period of time, was critical in helping me, because I didn't just learn about the car. It was a kind of a life philosophy, of helping somebody else. And I think about Eddie a lot to this very day, and I'm so glad that he was one of my very special friends and a key mentor.